Hello and welcome to the Music Production Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Funk, and this is the show about all things making music. On today's show, I have Charlie McCarron. Charlie is a composer, producer, and game designer. Charlie ran the podcast Composer Quest, which was a big inspiration for me in starting this podcast. And he's recently released a deck of 54 cards called the Troubadeck. And these are songwriting cards that will help you come up with chord progressions for your music. I used one in one of my Januaries. It was a lot of fun and it gave me ideas and places to start. I'm really excited about this deck and I wanted to have Charlie on to talk about it. We had a great conversation covering all kinds of aspects of creativity and songwriting. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Charlie's a great guy and lots of fun to talk to. Welcome aboard, Charlie. Great to have you, man. Good to have you back.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, you reminded me that I was the second interview you had on the show, I think.
Yeah, you were the second person that was ever on the show. That would be, I guess, 7 years ago about now.
Wow. Congrats. That's a long time to keep a podcast going.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Learned so much. And I credit you a lot, actually, because Composer Quest, your podcast, was very inspiring for me. It made me even more want to do it, like I was kind of had this urge, but listening to your show and I was like, yeah, this is really cool. I got to do this. I could hear how much fun you were having and you did that really cool thing for your final season. I think it was where you went and toured around and visited people and did podcasts with them.
Yeah. That was like probably the most fun 2-month segment of my life.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That was awesome. I got to do, a trip around the US, and then I had never been to like Asia or Australia. So there were a few people who listened to the show and they were like, hey, you can come stay with me. So I made it out there and my episodes, nice. I had 12 tour episodes, which I could have broken up into about 36 episodes. But for some reason I had it in my head, like, no, I'm going to do these epic chunks. So I think the final episode is like 4 hours long or something.
Wow. Yeah.
When are you going on tour?
Oh man, I was just kind of, as I was getting ready to talk to you, kind of revisiting some of the old stuff. I was like, wow, that would be something, but I don't know.
You can come to Minnesota. Hang out with me and Ben Burns also.
That would be fun. Yeah. Ben was the first guest on the show and he's been on a couple of times since. That would be fun for me, right? To like go visit and then come home. But the idea of like kind of doing the long tour, I like getting away, but I really do hate the travel part, the actual act of traveling. Mm-hmm. I like settling.
Yeah, I think it's a different thing now that I'm in my 30s. But I still really enjoy traveling around. But I'm like, wow, that was a bold thing that I just drove around the country by myself. And I don't know.
Found people to crash with and hang out and play music together. It
really was
that's like book material,
Yeah, for sure. Well, and like the best part afterwards was I had been in kind of like a low point in my creative part of my music for whatever. And just going around and being in a new spot and like making music with different people was so motivating for me. And I just got a spark back after that.
This summer I went to a songwriting retreat.
Oh, cool.
A former Berkeley student of mine, Matt Jones, was doing the Monterey songwriting retreat. And he did it the year before. He invited me, but I had school, I teach, so I couldn't go. But he scheduled it over the summer this year, and it was great. I mean, first of all, where we were was incredibly beautiful, Monterey, California. And the people that were there were amazing. A few of them came on the podcast since.
Nice.
But like you said, it was so refreshing to work with different people, to watch people work, the way they get to their results and the way they think about putting chords together and lyrics and the process of writing. It was just on so many levels really inspiring. And I felt a little bit like over my head, like the water was over my head. But it also kind of gave me a lot of confidence too, that there was there wasn't another me there. There were people
Yeah.
that were way more advanced in a lot of ways, but no one was exactly like me. And that's kind of, I think, what we all have to offer when we, in life, I
Yeah.
guess, really, right? But musically, especially, we're all a unique little composition of things.
Yeah. I so I use this in the class I taught on board game design, because a lot of those students are just got into college and they're feeling imposter syndrome pretty hard. Like, well, I don't know how to make a game. Like, I've never done this before. And the best description of like how to get over imposter syndrome is thinking about, I saw a visual of like a big circle, and then the small circle inside is what you know or what you think you know. And you think everyone else has this big circle around you of like, everyone's better than me, they know everything. But actually, it's more like you have a similar size circle that overlaps with you a little bit. And it's sort of like Venn diagrams of what you know that other people don't know. And just like, yeah, I like that image.
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone's got different strengths. So
Yeah, and that doesn't really go away, I've found, the imposter syndrome.
yeah.
You can kind of run into it all the time. And, you know, that's a great image too, because even like people that are just learning, just starting, I'm sure you see this with board game design, is that like they bring something kind of cool and innocent or fresh. Like they might not know that you're not supposed to do this, and they do it and it works out really well.
Yeah, and sometimes it's like they haven't gotten to that point because they don't think of themselves as, oh, I'm a game designer. I just had this idea and they're real excited about it. And then maybe the second game they make, they start to get a lot more pressure, like, oh, I should know what I'm doing by now. I mean, I still get that. Yeah.
Yes, that's very true too. I think that happened to me a lot ever since I started sharing work online. It was like suddenly like, well, I should probably know what I'm doing if I'm going to share stuff, right? If we're going to have this podcast, for instance. But leaning into the fact that I know I don't know, and like there's just always so much more to learn. The kind of like student perspective is just taking a lot of that pressure off, a lot of those feelings.
Yeah.
I love it. What a great adventure. That must have been just so much fun to do.
Yeah.
Like you said, maybe in my 20s.
Yeah. Yeah.
We got to tell everybody about the Troubadeck. I love this concept so much. It's, you know, to me, it solves this problem of when you get together with people, and you could be alone too, but I've been in so many situations where you get a few people together and everyone's got an instrument and you start to jam, and maybe either nobody takes the lead or somebody takes the lead, or what more than likely what happens is the E jam happens on guitar, E, open E, you know, so we're just going to drone on an E chord and someone's going to play pentatonics, and then we're off in our own worlds. We're not even jamming together. We're just, you know, 5 people playing instruments at the same time. But your deck, the Troubadeck, gives you a card with chord progressions and just gives you some direction. So useful.
Yeah. And I got my deck here for a visual who people are watching online. But yeah, I can't remember. The idea came to me originally because I wanted to make like a songwriting game that's kind of like a choose your own adventure. And you would go through, and this is something I still want to make. So Troubadeck, the Kickstarter I'm just doing right now, is kind of like a pilot program to see if just this deck of chords, first of all, will work. And my eventual idea is, you know, people could do like kind of like a D&D campaign sort of thing. You go through and decide what you want to do, and then that will influence what lyrics you get on the back of the card. So there'd be another deck that is like the lyric part of the songwriting. And based on what decision you make, you might get like positive lyrics or like sad lyrics. And then you might draw the sad chord card. That would be a lot of minor key cards. And a little bit of like Mad Libs style too. Like you'd enter some words and then they would show up in these lyrics. And so that'd be kind of like for people who are intimidated to try writing lyrics from scratch, it'd be like a way to just fill in the blanks kind of thing.
Right. Oh, that's awesome. That's a brilliant idea.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. I hope so my background is in game design too. And so I've been making board games and card games. And what I usually do is pitch it to other publishers who handle all the production and stuff. And so this time around, I was like, well, I can use what I've learned so far to make like a physical deck of cards and ship it out and stuff. But my eventual goal is like, I'd love to find a game publisher who wants to go through with like this bigger idea of a full-on songwriting experience game.
Right.
So we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's so good. I mean, some of the things I do to help myself with songwriting is just collect ideas. I have lists of sometimes chord progressions. I hear a song, I like the chords, I just write the chords down and then don't write the song down. So I just have the chords and forget what they are, or just titles or lines or topics or scenarios even. Like, oh, this would be a great song for, floating on a inner tube on a lake, in the summer.
I like that.
Yeah, so those help me a lot when it's time, when I have the time to make a song. Sometimes you're like, your time and your inspiration don't always line up. But if you wait for that to happen, you'll pretty much wait forever. So it's nice to have something that can just kind of push you a little and say, all right, let's pull this thread and see where it goes. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting that you've been like logging chord progressions, which I think is great. Because it's funny now that I've done the cards and a few people are already writing songs with them. Now that I hear the chord progression, I'm like thinking of those lyrics. Like I've had my friend's song that he wrote about Valley Fair, this like amusement park. And I can't get that melody and lyrics out of my head when I hear the chords now for one of those songs. But
that's funny.
Yeah. But I think that's going to be the really fun part for me is seeing people take these cards and write like totally different songs with them, with these chords. Because I'm
in the middle of January, right?
Yes.
So it's the end of January right now, and as soon as I saw your cards, I was like, yes, I need this, right? Because every day I'm trying to come up with something new, and I'm always pressed for time for whatever reason. I feel like I always make it the last thing I do at night.
That's awesome.
When your cards came along, I grabbed one of them that you had on the Kickstarter, and just there it is.
The guy, the little donkey with the mandolin or something.
Yeah. So it's kind of like I don't even know what key it is, and I think when you emailed me about this, you asked me for some suggestions, and one of the things I said was maybe let us know what key it's in. But when I used it, it was really nice to not have that because you got some chords in there that are outside the scale. I guess depending on how you look at the key, they're borrowed from different types of, you've got like, I kind of saw it as G major, but there's an A major in there, and I think a B major as well.
Yeah, you picked kind of a weird one. I like it.
And not having that kind of directive sort of made me look at it in a couple different ways too. It's like kind of E minor also, but there's like a little hint of like a C something, like some kind of mode of C in there.
Yeah.
It was so fun to just have that. And what I thought was really interesting, and it's something I kind of always realize when I start with a chord progression, is they kind of come to life after you start adorning it and start putting, whether it's lyrics, whether it's other melodies on top, or even a bass line or a beat, it really just started to feel so different than it did when I first just strummed them on my acoustic guitar. And some of those kind of weird outlier chords, suddenly, if you treat them the right way, like they just kind of flow right into each other. Yeah, it's kind of like a really rewarding experience.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I loved your jam you came up with. And yeah, Thanks. It sounds so much more natural than if you were just like strumming chord. And it's almost like you could sort of picture it like clay blocks that are just like blocks, and then you have to like smooth them out with the melodies that lead into the next chord. Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, there's just so many songs that have been written with such a few amount of chords that we have, right? I mean, there's tons of chords, but like really when you think about it.
Yeah. And if you think of top 40 hits, it's like even less usually.
Yeah, and the fact that it still feels different is just great. And those cards really bring that out.
Yeah.
That I can use that card again tomorrow and it'll be a totally different song.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. So, I mean, I'm going to be making 52 of them. So I'm sure, like, anyone who's listening, if you're curious to test them out, I'd love to get feedback too. And, like, what are your favorites? What are the clunkers? Before I, like, hit print on the deck. And Yeah.
How hard is it to choose? I mean, or is it hard to come up with 52? Like, what kind of challenges are you facing with this? Is it too many options, not enough?
I feel like it's going to be the right amount of, like, I think I came up with the 9 of these. I probably had 12 and then whittled it down to what I wanted to do as samples. But those probably took, like 1 day, maybe 3 hours total. So, and that was sort of me just getting used to the idea of it. So I think once I get in the flow of it, it'll be pretty easy to come up with chord progressions.
Yeah.
But I do feel like I'm going to start to overlap myself. So I think I've been writing all these on guitar so far, but I think at some point I want to switch to piano just to give myself a different space to think in. Because I think I write pretty differently when I'm on piano versus guitar.
Yeah, I don't really play piano, but I use keyboards.
Yeah.
And it's the same way. Even if I'm using like Ableton Push, which I use it in the chromatic so it looks like guitar, but you still play differently. Like even if you play a different guitar, right? Like you play it differently. You get different kinds of things, but we do have sort of our guitarist tricks in the fact that certain chords are open, use open strings, kind of make you lean towards those keys. You don't play a lot of guitar songs in like E flat or B flat, like the kind of awkward guitar, but on piano they make a little more sense.
Right. Yeah, and I was thinking about like how many, because I want to include a chord chart for piano and guitar hopefully, and I'm like, well, if I can't include all of the 12 like sharps and flats included keys or chords, because that's going to be too much. So I think right now I have B flat and F sharp, which F sharp feels like a weird one to include, except for the fact that it feels really nice on guitar for whatever reason. Yeah. So I don't know.
Right. Yeah, that's neat that it you'll get like different kinds of feels and all that.
One thing that I also is going to be an interesting challenge. I want the cards to go from like easiest to hardest based on the number on the cards. So they are like a poker deck. You'll have the number in the corner that, so like a 2 will be kind of the easiest chords for people to play, all the way up to, the face cards will be trickier. seventh chords and so on.
That's a great idea.
And I also want them to feel like you could combine nearby numbers and they would work together well as like a verse, chorus. So that you could use a couple cards at a time. And maybe like pairs work well together too. So like the 7 of spades and the 7 of clubs work well together.
And you've got different moods based on I forget what those are called now. The hearts, the diamonds, the suits. Yes.
Yeah. So right now, and this may evolve, but right now I have the hearts as the happy. There'll be a lot of major chords, and spades felt like moody. It's kind of like an upside down heart. So diamonds being adventurous, I don't know, searching for diamonds, and clubs as mysterious. But yeah, subject to change.
Right.
But I like the idea that someone could pick out what mood they're in.
Yeah. Yeah, you kind of leave that up to interpretation a bit too. Right. Like all the chords, I guess, are. Because how you play them, how you write over them, what you say over them changes everything.
Yeah, I think about this a lot when I'm film scoring, that my job isn't like, there's a lot that I do that's very minute changes to chords. Just a lot of film scores, they want just like very ambient, drony things. And sometimes it's a matter of knowing if this should be like a major 7th chord or just a dominant 7th chord or a minor 7th chord. And like changing those just changes the whole mood of the scene. In a way that's like easy for me to do. But like someone who, like the director will be like, whoa, what did you do there? It's like a totally different mood. It's like, oh, I changed one note. Or like, I get this all the time where it's like, I don't really like the piano in this section. There's something about it. And then I put it down an octave and then they like it. Not sure why, but yeah.
So you have to kind of figure out what they're thinking because I'm guessing they're not always speaking in musical terms, right? They're not gonna be like, that 7th shouldn't be flat, make it the major 7th. And
And usually when directors do try to do that, it's like more confusing. It's like, well, wait, what about the bells in this track? I don't think I had any bells in there, but yeah, it's pretty fun. I've been film scoring now for my job for almost 7 years, probably when I was on the podcast last, I was just starting up film scoring. And now I do that for half of my job. The other half is the board game designing. But film scoring wise, I usually work with local people here in Minnesota, and I do a lot of like documentaries, TV things that will maybe someday be on actual TV, but right now web series is.
Yeah. Now, that's another type of thing where you're sort of given a little bit of information. You're not going in blank, right? Like kind of the way the cards would help you start off a little bit. And some of the people I've spoken to that do scoring have they speak of how important like the brief is, or how important just the whatever's happening in the film at that point really helps direct them, compared to somebody that might just be writing music for their own or their band or something. And you start with nothing. You have to come up with that.
Yeah.
I imagine there's like some kind of almost like similarity to using the cards when you get a project to work on for film.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes the directors give me free rein, but usually they have like a temp track with music they're used to, which can be a curse and a blessing, depending on if they're used to hearing it over and over in the edit, they're naturally inclined to like it more than whatever I give them. Even if it's better, whatever you're used to.
We get that with demo-itis with our songs, where your first recording is like, I love it, but it's, objectively worse. But when you listen to it,
nostalgia.
Yeah.
From an hour ago when I recorded that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. But I do really love the challenge, and I especially love doing feature films rather than short films. I've realized, because I started out doing obviously a lot more short films because it's what people are making more often. But in a short film, you spend so much time trying to find the right sound for the film. And then, you score for like 5 minutes of scoring, maybe, and then it's done. And they're like, well, I spent all that time. And no. Whereas a feature film's really cool because you do spend that time up front, like coming up with up to 10 different styles maybe, but then you can start like copying and pasting that style and remixing it. So a lot of times what I do, I have like a big session open in Ableton Live with the entire film and start putting in sounds, and then I'll copy the MIDI values over, but I'll change like the tempo, I'll change the key to make it feel different, and then customizing the intros and outros of how the music starts and ends is like really key for film scoring too.
So you working in one session and the whole film is?
Well, no, not exactly. I thought about it for this project. Sometimes I do attempt that because I'm like, well, I'm using a lot of the same sounds, so I'll create the entire sound bank. But then it just doesn't work that well once you start getting, because I'll want to like tweak the effects here and not like 30 minutes later. And also right now Ableton is not that awesome at handling tempo changes when you're working with film, because I have to like really be careful when I'm tweaking the tempo just to like make it sync well with the picture. Yeah. And then if I do that on one scene in the beginning and then the scene after it, I have to retweak the tempo just to get it to the right spot.
It doesn't kind of like hook to that part in the film.
No. Which that's really my only qualm with using Ableton for scoring. Otherwise, I love it. But
that sounds like an important thing to have, though.
It is.
Right? Because if I guess the way I'm trying to picture how this would work, that if you go back to an early scene in the movie and change the tempo, the movie's not, it's just gonna kind of keep going. Right. It's not warped, right? So it's just those changes are going to get shifted downstream.
Yep. Yeah, so that's why I usually give up on trying to do the whole film in one set. Yeah. But I will end up like having a full session where I put my rendered scores from all the different sections into see where they fit well. And this was the first time. So I'm working on a documentary called The Fishing Hat Bandit, which is about a guy who robbed 23 banks in Minnesota within a year and a half when he was 55, I think. Very fascinating documentary, and it's super fun doing the scoring because I get to do like sort of this like intense bank robbery music, but plus like sort of lighter and more fun in some cases, because it's kind of just interesting guy.
Well, you mentioned it to me earlier before we started recording, and it kind of made me chuckle because I guess I felt like you have to be sort of like a lifelong career criminal to decide to rob 24 banks. But it's just a funny thing to imagine, like maybe down the road in my future, one day I just say, you know what?
Yeah.
I'm gonna, like, as if I'm picking up a new hobby, you know?
Yeah.
I'm going to learn sailing. No, I'm going to learn bank robbing. And
yeah. Yeah, the guy
like bird watching or something.
Yeah. And the guy made it look easy. I mean, just pop in, give him a note. I've got a gun. Give me all the money. I don't think he actually had a gun, but you know, he met this guy. He was like, had a little bit of a shady thing going on. So he did end up in jail at one point, but he met a guy in jail who told him like, yeah, this is how I rob banks. So he just took some notes and
you don't take your notes from a guy that's already in jail on how to do it, right?
But I think he said he did the math on like how much he actually made and the amount of time he was in jail was like, 17 cents an hour or something that he made from which he had to give back out, of course, too. But yeah.
Wow.
He was robbing him. He would get like maybe $2,000 from robbing a bank. And it seems like, wow, that does not feel worth it at all.
So all that planning, is that what it is? Oh, okay, so that's 17 cents. Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, like, no, I guess he was talking about like for his amount of his life that he lost
gotcha.
in jail.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah, that's not a good deal to sell your time for 17 cents an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah. Better off any job.
Any job, yep.
Any honest job. But that sounds like a fun story to write for. I can imagine there's a lot of like you said, action, getaway music, but it has a little quirk of humor in it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this was the first, why I brought it up, because this is the first time I was pre-selecting sounds that I think would work with the film. And I'm sure other people work this way, but for some reason I always start out a project and like, well, I'm starting from scratch. I don't know what the sounds are going to be, and I just like spend so long figuring out what the palette of sounds should be as I'm composing. And this time it just felt so much better that I made a palette of sounds that I think would fit the mood beforehand. Because really, like, I do enjoy tweaking sounds and stuff, but I much prefer just like getting in it and actually writing the music. And so having a sound bank was super helpful.
Right. Yeah, you know what to expect, I guess. You know that you got other things coming in later that you have to sort of be aware of instead of just writing a part. I do that a lot when I'm, coming in here to work and seeing where the wind takes me today. A lot of times the parts I come up with are taking up way too much space early on. So if I'm writing like a synth part, it doesn't have any rests. It plays through, maybe it's an 8-bar phrase and it plays throughout the whole thing. So it's not prepared for things because I don't know what's next. As far as I know, it's only going to be this one part.
Right. Yeah, and that's I think that's a good lesson from film scoring too, in that I start out doing the same thing you're talking about, like where I have a really dense arrangement for the chords I'm playing or whatever, and then I'll add, because I love adding more layers, I'll add like 10 layers, and then I give it to the director and they're like, no, there's too much, I don't like it. And so I take out like little pieces of it and like, okay, how's this? No, still too much. And then I take out more. And what's great about that is now not only am I like making the arrangement a little better and more clear, but I could reuse the things that I took out as like the B section maybe, or rather than just like, oh, it's a constant full on thing. I'll just like bring it back later.
Right.
And sort of like the other thing I learned recently is like you can get directors and everybody listening on board to like a big full thing of layers that's really complex if you started out just simpler. Because usually I would start out complex and then it gets a slightly more complex. But if I just start out with like real basic intro, then it feels like, you know what I'm saying.
You build up to it.
Yeah.
You're not just like guns blazing.
Like actual good songwriters should do that anyways. But for some reason I didn't it doesn't always like translate from what I would do in one of my own songs into scoring.
Right. Well, you're writing music for a film. It's not, the film isn't there for your music.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like a music video, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
the music is the thing and the film supplements it. The music is supplemental to the film. It's supporting it. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it makes sense. You'd have to kind of come at it a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's sort of actually, at first, maybe you have to work on your ego as a film composer, because you'll have this really cool thing and then you have to scrap it. But now I think of it as a very fun challenge to like, maybe in a similar way where if you're doing in the art world, like if you were an illustrator versus a graphic designer or something, where it's like an illustrator would get to maybe have a little more what you think of as creativity and freedom to make something really intricate and cool looking. But like a graphic designer has a very specific function, and they're all about like making things elegant and working well for whatever it is they're doing. So
Right.
yeah, that's kind of how I view film scoring.
That's a nice analogy. Yeah, because a lot of times the graphic design is simple. It's there to get a message across, and it's less about the actual image and all of that, but the message, just like the film.
And it still has flavor in a way, but
Yeah.
just a different kind of flavor. It's like framing things.
Yeah, different purpose, I guess. So what was your palette for this, bank robbery?
Ooh,
Kinda,
yeah. And I'm trying to think
how are you communicating this?
yeah. I'm trying to think if I used any Afro DJ Mac sounds. I might have.
No way.
I might have. I had a whole series
crazy.
of like, how I split it up was like drone sounds. And I had maybe 10 of those that I thought could fit, from like kind of dark drones to light drones. Then I had keyboard sounds, which I'm always looking for more good keyboard sounds. So if you have suggestions too, I'd love to hear them. But like a Rhodes keyboard and then piano, and those are like my two kind of go-to for film scores. And then I usually use upright bass plucks a lot, especially for like anything that's a little quirky and a little bit like, well, it actually works well for the bank robbery scenes too, just like pit space. And then I use string sections too, more as like some like short stuff, like pizzicato obviously also works really well. And yeah, short bowings. I kind of have to go with whatever's going to sound good also, for when it's not played live by musicians. So that kind of narrows down. Like, I usually don't use brass instruments because they really stand out as sounding bad. If they're
like a library
kind of sound, yeah. Although, like, maybe you've heard about this, but I think that's one of the main reasons why French horn became such a huge instrument for film scores. Like the Hans Zimmer's scores and things, because they sound better as sampled instruments than like a trumpet. Because they're a little more lower in frequency, they sound better in the mix. And so the directors who have to approve of how the scores are going to sound, even if they are going to use an orchestra, they still have to approve the demos. And so I think film score composers will naturally gravitate towards things that will make the director happy. So it's like, held out strings versus like, it's hard to make like a a very fast string part or something on MIDI, it's just not going to sound great. So, yeah. So since I'm not recording with an orchestra either, doing everything in the box, I have to just make the sounds work.
That's pretty wild, though, that since you got to make the demo sound good, it actually affects the process. That kind of weird, unintended consequences of the way we work now, right? I guess in the past, when you didn't have that option, going back a few decades, you would probably get to use that stuff because you weren't going to be able to have a MIDI arrangement.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
The directors had to have a lot more trust in the composers, too.
Yeah. Wow. So, is it just because those instruments are so expressive? Fast string parts, there's so much going on with the bowing and I guess even the vibrato and just the spacing between the notes that is probably really hard to capture. And trumpet is like really, there's so many tones that come out of that instrument.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the hardest things to replicate is like the attacks and flowing from one note to the next if it's really fast things. Like a long string sound is great because you can have it kind of come in more easily and it feels like it just blends in there. But especially if it's a high frequency thing like high violin or high trumpet, it just pokes out in the mix. At least the scores I make, like that's probably another reason I don't use that as much is because I sort of need the score to blend with whatever's happening anyways. And especially if there's dialogue, like you don't want it to really interrupt. And like John Williams was the master of that scoring. Well, he's obviously a master of like composing and orchestration, but he's so good at, like, if you listen to the Star Wars scores as you're watching the movie too, it's like every scene, wherever there's dialogue, he orchestrated it so that, the trumpets are going to cut out when Han Solo has a line. And then they come back in. And so it's not a volume fade. Like, I mean, they probably did a little of that, but it's so natural just the way he orchestrated it around the dialogue, which I don't know.
So cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's almost like the voice is part of the score in his mind.
Yes,
so
totally.
Just like you would mix a song, you don't usually have like a guitar solo blaring when you're singing,
Right.
That tends to get in the way.
Yeah. And that's my number one pitch for when directors are like, well, should I hire a composer or should I just use library music? I'm like, well, if with a composer, you can have them arrange it around your dialogue and everything else going around. Because the worst is when I hear someone like places a hard rock track or something, or real
hard
loud
rock 17
something, yeah,
medium pace groove,
yes.
wave.
Yeah, something loud and with drums especially.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's so loud that they have to dip it down under the dialogue to almost nothing, and then it loses all the energy. Whereas if you had a composer write it, like they could write a rock track and then they just like cut out the drums from the mix, or suddenly it goes into like something a little more low key and then come back in, and so you don't lose the energy of the track by just fading down.
Yeah. Right, we can like stop playing on the cymbals and maybe go to something a little more subdued. And wow, that's a good reason to watch some of those movies again. Some John Williams, right?
For sure.
Just noticed that. I've never thought of it in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But makes a lot of sense. It's important. Even when I do my music with the pod, sometimes when I make my like little clips for the podcast, these little like 60-second things, I usually just kind of find some jams I've been playing around with, stuff that's probably not going anywhere, but I kind of like anyway. But it's the stuff that if it has too much going on up there, it doesn't work because it just gets in the way. And the option is to side chain it and have it, drop in volume but it has that kind of like, this thing is like trying to get around the voice,
Yeah.
And it's almost like worse than having nothing.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And like podcasts and stuff, people are used to that. It's like, oh, this is obviously like the background music. It's going to fade down. But like in a film, it's quite different, I think.
Right.
The feeling of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause that's a lot of the tone, a lot of the emotion is coming from that. So if it just kind of goes away. Wow. You give me a whole, another layer to watch some movies.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. That sounds like so much fun though, designing. I've really enjoyed hearing people talk about that aspect of it, picking out the sounds, what's kind of the, flavors of this particular film that we're scoring.
Yeah, you'd excel at that. That'd be cool to see what you do with the film score. Just like having your vast library of sounds.
Well, I was going to ask you actually, is it sometimes better to kind of stick with more traditional things that are not, because like the way I think of it is part of your job is almost to not be too noticeable, right? Like you can't, I've gone to like, one of the last movies I saw, I forget which one it was, like I've been to the movies a lot lately, but I went to the movies to see like a Trent Reznor, Atticus Ross scored film. I forget whatever it was. And I went to the theater and watched it. And when I left, I was like, oh crap, I didn't even really pay attention to the music.
Yeah.
Like my whole point of going, because it just fell right in. And then, watched it again and it was really fun. But that's kind of your job, is to sort of not stick out and not distract.
Yeah.
Just absorb the people into the film.
Yeah, exactly.
So do those more experimental sounds almost feel like they might be a problem in this type of world?
Yeah, sometimes. Once in a while you get the director who really wants to have unique sound for their film. Maybe their film's like a little more on the artsy side. But especially for documentary work, I'm basically sticking to stuff that feels like, it hits the tropes of whatever documentary I'm working on. So a lot of times that's like piano, strings, drones. That's like kind of neutral drones even. I don't make things too synthy unless they're really into like the revival of like synth sounds. So that's sort of coming back. Like a few directors are now like, "Ooh, yeah, we should have some of this like cool synth sounds in there." Like, great, let's do it.
Yeah, I've seen that trend. I think probably Stranger Things was the real turning point.
Yeah, it's fun actually. I sort of grew up. Well, I was born in the 80s. And I was growing up with like pretty cheesy sounding synths back in the early 90s and stuff. And I didn't really like them at the time. And I thought like 80s production was silly. And I got sick of like saxophone sounds because it was in everything. So I didn't really think about it too much as a kid. But later on, I realized like, wow, I have a distaste for those sounds and they sound cheesy. But then, like, since this revolution of, like, that style coming back, now I'm like, oh, this is awesome because I can use these cheesy synth sounds and they actually sound cool.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've had that experience at all.
Definitely. Yeah. That, like, it was, in the 90s, of course. I started playing guitar in 94. And nothing is less cool than like cheesy 80s synth sounds in 94, like after Nirvana came out and all of that. So, any of that stuff was just like laughable. But then it kind of became back almost like ironically. It was like, oh, that sounded so cheesy, but it takes me back to the 80s, and it's loaded with emotion and kind of they have such a like world to them that they bring you into. And when you want to create that, like, yeah, sometimes like the cheesier electric piano I can find, FM synth, like the better. It's just
and not only for pop stuff, but like dark wave, or
like kind of like anything now. It kind of lost that cheesiness. Or it's good cheesy. I don't know how to put it exactly, but it tickles me, I guess, in a fun way.
It does. I'm thinking the Drive soundtrack probably also was a big part of that. Like when that movie came out, I don't know.
The Drive.
Drive. Was that the movie I'm thinking of? It was just, was it Ryan Gosling just driving around doing,
I don't know,
doing hits and stuff.
Yeah.
Anyways, that had like 80s synth soundtrack.
Like a synth wave sort of thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then all the directors were like, oh yeah, we got to have those sounds.
Well, they're funny. They're like really futuristic, but from the 80s perspective. And I think we just had such an awesome vision of the future around that time, 70s, 80s. Even if you watch like old shows, my wife and I have been watching a lot of Twilight Zones, from the 60s, and what they thought the future was going to be and like what it actually became. It's so funny. Like they're space traveling in like 1981, they're traveling to different planets. But this vision of like this idea of the future when I was a kid in the 80s was so fun and amazing and space age. And it's kind of weird, like how we are now. We're still here on Earth. None of our cars fly. And,
Nope.
We're not teleporting. We have so many other things that we had no idea were coming. Like, we had video phones, like we're doing this video call right now, but the video phone was still on the wall.
Yeah.
It was next to the regular old dial-up phone, with the rotary phone. We didn't know it was going to be in our pocket. All this funny things that we missed, but some of the actual dreams of the future are just still so far away.
Yeah, I was actually just talking to my friend today about, what jobs are going to be around in the future. And we had thought like, oh yeah, with like the robot revolution, we won't have to do crappy manual labor jobs or whatever. And now instead, people are having office jobs replaced because AI is easier to make than actual robots, probably. So, I mean, it's taken over in both realms, but.
No, but you're right. And I think about this with my high school students a lot. When there's like trade schools they can go to when they're upperclassmen, and like you're still gonna need electricians. You still need auto mechanics, and like robots aren't doing that stuff, and they're maybe not yet, at least. I don't know.
Yeah.
But the plumbing in my house is so unique.
Yeah.
Compared to every other house that you just need a person to assess it. But like the things like even creative work, writing, and it's like, I don't really need that anymore.
I know. I am prepared for someday my film scoring work will probably be able to be automated to some extent.
You make a good point though about adjusting intelligently to dialogue and things that are happening in the film that you can get, I guess, computers to produce music that sounds like nice generic music, but I don't know.
Well, to bring it back to the Troubadeck, one thing I'm working on is trying to automatically generate some backing tracks because I realized that, not everyone can play a chord instrument. So when I give them these cards that have just chord names on it, it's like, well, what do I do with this on violin or something? Yeah. And so I've been starting a project. I think we are very close to the stretch goal happening on Kickstarter, where I will create
it might happen during this conversation.
Track. Oh yeah, only like $60 away.
It's gone up like $25 since we started talking.
Nice. So
cool.
Yeah. So anyways, what I want to do is make accompaniment tracks, basically based on all the chords on the cards, and then people can just listen to those, and they'll be on loop, and you can just jam along with those. So my goal is to, just be able to put in the block chords in Ableton, and then generate with using arpeggiator effects and other little effects, generate like a whole backing band kind of. Like,
yeah. I saw the video you put up. It looked like maybe even today you put that up. And you had the kind of concept going where you just had the chords blocked out, nothing fancy, simple. But all the music was really intricate, lots of movement. And it sounded like music. It didn't just sound like dun.
Right. Yeah.
Dun.
Yeah. So my method kind of was, okay, so I have maybe 4 instruments in that track: plucked bass, piano, Rhodes sound, and then a harp for that one, because it's kind of like a dreamy effect. And I have an arpeggiator going a little slower on the bass, so it's only doing like 2 notes per beat, or I guess like probably 4 notes per measure. Then the piano is a little bit more. It's like maybe on the quarter notes or eighth notes, and then the harp is maybe following that too. I can't remember which instrument's doing what, but essentially like each one's at a different rate of arpeggios. So it'll feel a little more like they're doing their own thing versus all following the pattern.
Right.
And I'll have different types of arpeggios going. So not just like up and down. It's like one's maybe doing the pinky every other one, or whatever it is.
Yeah. Right. Thumb, pinky, and all that.
Yep. It's getting a little in the weeds maybe, but I love that arpeggiator effect. Use it all the time.
Yeah, it's cool. You could probably just set up a macro knob that'll control the speed of the arpeggiators.
Yeah.
You can customize it a bit. And
yeah.
I guess you could probably, I don't know if that's what you did or not, but you could probably just, you could probably rack all those instruments up into one rack with different chains, right? And just feed one block of chords.
That's my goal, which I haven't had to do before. But this is like the perfect example of it, because I'll have 54 different chord progressions that I want to use the same instruments with, so I can have like 10 different styles of each card is my goal. So if I set up all this ahead of time, then I can just automatically create them, and then I'll have like 520 recordings out of a lot less work. So
right.
Yeah, that's my goal.
Yeah, that's great. That's smart. Really cool idea. And that'd be so helpful, right? Even just for practice, I want to work on just like playing some guitar, and got a nice backing track. I see the chords on my card.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have those handy still? Do you mind holding it up?
Yeah, the cards.
Because for anyone watching, I think another thing worth mentioning is the art. They're beautiful. And I love the theme you got going. You want to tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah. So
it's Cooper's March.
This is my parents' dog right here, Cooper. Yeah. So what I'm doing with the cards is I also enjoy doing drawings, and
that's illustration, not really graphic design.
Right. It's a mix, weirdly, because in medieval times, the graphic designers were these people who would make like very intricate little paintings along the sides of their books. It's called marginalia, of like whatever was in the margins of their sacred texts or whatever would be these like silly little drawings of rabbits like killing humans and people playing trumpets out their butts and
medieval times.
Yeah, I do not know how they thought it was okay that was in the Bibles, man. And stuff. But I think it was also to sort of like make people remember the pages. Or just for fun. I don't know. But anyway, so I'm trying to do that with this deck, and I'm making a different animal playing an instrument on each card. So that was part of the Kickstarter. All those rewards are taken up, sadly, but I had 20 backers could get their pet, a portrait of their pet. So
yeah, so cool.
Yep. And we might see a special guest of Brian's on there. So yeah, but yeah, the art super fun to do because medieval artists were just like goofy and
they look great. I love the characters and the style too. Like he captured that style really well. Looking at them myself now, they and like you have one picture with that lizard bearded dragon. Maybe it is.
Yes,
I don't even know. I don't know my lizards too well.
That is based on my bearded dragon.
Yeah.
Pat 2. Yeah, if I had him handy, I'd show him on screen. Yeah. But
there's a picture on the Kickstarter.
Mm-hmm.
He looks like a happy guy, hanging out, his mouth open.
Yep. I was like, well, what would a medieval person do to a bearded dragon? Even though they're very small and unintimidating, they would probably give him like dragon wings and like a big tongue sticking out. And
yeah, it really brings back, though, this playful attitude, which sometimes we forget with music, that we play music, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't work music, we play it. And to put these characters on there, these pets especially too, and that they're inviting you to play with these chords, have fun with it, experiment with them a bit, and see what you can come up with. And you could easily, some of the cards have more chords than others. I guess each line is meant to be like a bar or a measure or something, which you could always just change if you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't even have to use all of them. You can just find 3 chords that you like a lot, and the next 2 lines is the chorus, and just look at it that way. And what you did in one of the videos, just combining them too. It's a great idea. I'm going to combine these 2 cards, and that's our song. And then play. See what happens. Have fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's my hope. I wanted to, like, in contrast to classical music where everything's written out, time signature is really set. I'm like, I want this to be as flexible as possible so people can just read the chords and
it's so handy when you're playing with other people. And I play in a 3-piece like garage rock band, and only 2 of us need to know what chords are.
Right.
The drummer doesn't. He can just play. Just keep playing. We'll figure it out. But even with 2 people, it's tricky. You like if you try, and it's easy to get stuck and kind of just like, all right, we're playing this thing. I guess we'll go to the 4 for the next part. We'll do like, it becomes 12-bar blues basically, if you're not careful. To have something that you can just follow along and get a feel for and start building grooves out of.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we're gonna go to this, but I know I got this like groove pattern going, and I'm excited to try that with the band.
That'd be awesome.
Put them down and be like, all right, man, these are going to be our chords.
Here we go. Yep.
Alex is my bass player. Like, you play these chords. Chris, just play the drums.
Nice. Yep.
Don't worry about anything.
I know. I was like, was sort of wishing I could have something for percussion players too, drummers and everybody. But
Maybe that's the bigger game.
That's the part of the bigger game, maybe.
Yeah.
I was also trying to think, because we hit my first stretch goal, which was that I'm going to make a game you can play out of the cards too, beyond just using them for the songwriting tool part of it. And I started thinking last night about how I could maybe make a rhythm game with the cards. So something like maybe the colors matter. So it's like, oh, if I get 2 black cards in a row, that's like the kick drum that you stomp your foot. And then the red diamond is like you make a click with your mouth or something. Yeah. I don't know, but
okay,
yeah, maybe like a Simon type game.
Yeah.
Like if you remember that, where you had to remember the order.
Oh God.
Stressful.
Stressful. What kind of game?
Oh, I used to go to Little Caesars. They had like I don't know why they had
pizza
this
place.
Yeah, Little Caesars. They had like a Simon type game where you could win free crazy bread. And usually I would win a pop for free when I went in there. But sometimes I would get the crazy bread if I lasted long enough on this machine.
Right.
It's just like, what a weird promotional thing.
Yeah, right. Just to have you come. But yeah, it's fun, right? Gets you trying. And
yeah.
I mean, nothing. I'm sure that's the best cheesy bread you can get. The one you won.
Oh, yeah.
Your prize cheesy bread.
Day of my childhood, probably.
Those games are funny. I think of the other one, similar, Bop It. You probably remember that.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
I have it. I can see it right now on my shelf.
Do you? I've always found with those games, the first time I go is always my best. Because you can't think. You just have to do it. You can't think. As soon as you like start thinking like, oh, I'm doing it. Like it's a lot like sometimes when you play an instrument and you start learning a song and you're like, oh, I'm doing it. And then you're not.
Yep.
But then every time after that, like I don't do half as good. It's like I've spent that, part of my brain today.
Yeah.
I got to walk away.
Yep.
Game design is an interesting world. I wonder, do you find similarities with that in songwriting or film scoring? Because you got like rules, conventions, expectations. You can't just rehash the same thing. It can't be too familiar. It can't be.
Yeah.
If you see like, if they've helped inform you in both ways.
Definitely. Yeah. I think any creative field you're in will help another creative field, because you do start to learn those psychological things more that, like you're saying, that's definitely a part of game design and music, where you got to give people what they're familiar with so they can hook into it, but then like a little bit something new to spice it up. And for like game design, one of my goals I always think about is how can I make people feel clever? I don't know if that translates over to music, but that's like.
Well, sometimes I was listening to the new record from The Smile, which is like Radiohead.
Oh yeah.
Tom
they're
York,
great.
and I think it just came out today.
Oh,
and
nice.
I noticed like this part has an 11 count, and I felt like,
yeah,
I realized that.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a little bit of that, kind of like music nerd comes out like, I see what they're doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, Radiohead does make me feel clever for listening to it. Yeah.
Sometimes it's work. It takes a little mental strength, but yeah. So maybe there's that. But that's interesting. That's an interesting thought to put into the game. Make you feel clever.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Good question.
Always
trying to figure it out.
Feel clever.
Yeah, I think it's, I don't know, a combo of.
As a teacher, this would be useful for me too.
Right. Yeah. How do you make your students feel clever? Yeah, it's like you're saying, people need to feel like some level of, I know what to expect like I've seen this puzzle before and I know how to solve it because I learned the easier steps along the way. Actually, that's a pretty good comparison to music, because like we were talking about, sometimes you got to start out real simple with like, maybe it's just the guitar strums, and then comes the bass and drums, and then some melody comes in. And so it's like you got to ease people in.
Give them like a motif that will come back later.
Before you know it. And it's also about flow, I think. Just like music's about flow. Games are about, can you get someone in the flow of playing so they actually forget that they're playing a game and they're just like in it. They're not thinking about the rules. They're just enjoying it. So, and there's definitely like a crowd of board game people who are really into the rules, and they're like, would be fine playing a 10-hour game and reading the rules like in depth. That's not my kind of game. Or like I like to design a little more shorter, more elegant games than that. But it's probably a comparison to like the new music world, or like classical music world that's like more modern, where they're not really writing for a big audience. They're writing for people who are really nerdy about this music, and they get something out of it that no one else will get, which might be really deep to them. And because they are familiar with it enough, or they know it's like just a different language.
Yeah, I get exactly what you mean. My wife is deeply involved in the tabletop gaming community. She had a store for 10 years or so, and
cool.
runs the Long Island Tabletop Gaming Expo, which I feel like you should be there.
Yeah, that would be really fun.
Yeah, it's really cool. And my way of helping is to be in the one of the theaters where they do panels. I do the sound, set up mics and all that, the audio stuff. And one of the panels they had last year was game design. And so they had some people that were developing their own games, and they were explaining what they were doing, and people could ask questions. And really interesting, how they put it together. But I totally get what you're saying, because sometimes I'll play with them, and sometimes the rules, I'm just like, what? Like, this is just like, oh my God, like, it's too much. Like, there's too many things I have to keep track of, right? But they're very used to it. Game night is like, an 8-hour event, and we're going to sit there and play it. And for me, game night is like a 45-minute game, like something quick. So it's a lot of adjusting, and I can appreciate like the things that are a little bit easier for entry, but also see where kind of, I guess, like, like you said, kind of like the classical music world, that's where they are. They're doing like Mozart and Beethoven, and I'm nursery rhymes and
sure. And I mean, like, that perspective makes me never judge a certain type of music, I think, because it's like, there might be more accessible music for someone or not, but it's like you're all just getting something you enjoy out of it, whatever form it's in, like whether it's like this sugary candy version of music or the like acquired taste kind of music. So thinking about the audience is a really helpful thing in all creative fields, I think.
Right. The last game we played was pretty fun. It was kind of like a combination of Pictionary and Telephone. Two really simple games, right?
Telestrations, maybe?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's what it was.
I love that game.
You get your card, you got to draw something, and then you pass it around, and you got what the person before you got, and it basically goes around the circle of players until
Yeah.
you get your thing back and you look at what they drew. And it's like nothing like what you originally did half the time.
Yes, I love it.
But really fun, yeah.
My friends and I actually played. It started during COVID, like extended version of that game over the course of like 2 months, I want to say, where we would have a week to work on our drawings.
Oh,
And
cool.
so we'd send it by email, and yeah, we just had some amazing artists with our group too. So, and some not amazing artists, which also makes it hilarious.
Yeah.
So
Sometimes, and again, like it just goes to show, like your skill level doesn't necessarily correlate with output and results.
right.
And I mean, you can learn from everybody. And like we said earlier, sometimes it's nice to have somebody that doesn't know the musical rules because they'll do the weird thing that sounds amazing. But yeah, sometimes the people that are less artistic just get right to the point. They're not trying to draw. They're just communicating, and that's really what you're trying to do. We had a lot of that. It was pretty funny. Some people were just really good at communicating, and some people were trying to draw too much.
Yeah. This is reminding me actually of one of my favorite interviews I did on Composer Quest. I don't know if you've ever run across Syriac, who is more like does animations.
I'm pretty sure I listened to most, if not all, of those shows.
Well, maybe I'll jog your memory by describing what his YouTube videos are. He makes these really outlandish animated things that are like, one's called Cows, 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 and it's just like a video that's like pictures of cows, but then he morphs them in weird ways and very like, it's like tessellations or something where the little cows come out of a big cow and all this weird stuff that is awesome. And I didn't realize it at first, but he makes all the music for them too. And the music is so wild and it fits that style perfectly. But I would have guessed based on the music that, oh, he must like know a lot of music theory because he's doing all these like weird chord changes and just wild. And when I interviewed him, he's like, no, I don't really know any of that stuff. I just kind of like look at the MIDI and he just draws it in a pleasing way to him visually. And then just turns out sounding like amazing.
It's crazy.
So, yeah.
Right, just make it look nice. And
yeah. And I mean, sure, he's like listening back and tweaking here and there, but it's just fun to see someone who's like an outsider maybe to the music world just like have a really cool perspective. Right.
Man, that's an interesting kind of newer, more like 21st century approach too. Where, in the past would have been someone just putting their hands in certain spots on the piano or something, but to draw it, just, I'm just going to draw, and these ones are going to go up. Those will go, they're making this shape. And a lot of music is that actually, like there's like patterns,
geometry,
and shapes.
Yeah.
There's probably a lot of people doing that actually. I mean, I know of a lot of people that don't play instruments and are able to make pretty interesting music.
Right.
With clicking.
Yeah. Not to keep plugging the Troubadeck, but I
plug away. It's awesome.
Well, no, I just, when I was testing it with a friend, I was so surprised because she had GarageBand up on her iPad and she's like, yeah, I don't really play any instruments, but let me just try it. And suddenly she was like entering all the chords in GarageBand and like doing arrangements and stuff that just sounded awesome. I'm like, how? She made like, I don't know, 10 in a row. I'm like, you are already a music producer. And like, you telling me you like never did this before in GarageBand?
Wow.
Like, what? So yeah.
Wow.
That's the hope is like people who are on the fringe of like, I have GarageBand downloaded, but I don't know where to go, where to start.
Yeah. Oh man, it must be, that's going to help a lot of people where they can just take the deck and, okay, these chords go together. It's all right. Let's put them together and then because that's like, it's obviously it's important, right? It matters, but in a lot of ways, though, you kind of just need something, and take it from there. You need something like to react off of. So if you just got a few chords there, I'm sure that's plenty for so many people to just go. And for me, it often is with my band, for sure. Sometimes we just need a riff, we need a little progression, and then we'll make the song out of it.
And I think what's interesting now, like thinking about with the chords already in place, is like just thinking back when I was in a band, it's like I would usually come up with like a guitar riff that sounded cool, but then you're kind of like, well, I don't know where to go from there. Like, I guess I'll just keep looping it. But like with instead now the bones are there, and now you can like fill in around the bones.
Yeah. That's a great
It'll be interesting. It's a fun experiment for me to try to come up with 54 unique enough sounding. Like, I want them to be generic too, that they just work really nicely. Like, I'll probably use some generic like pop chord progressions too, but I don't want to I want to try to not repeat too many of the same ideas. Like right now I'm usually going challenge. From at the end, it ends on a 5 and then goes to 1 to loop back. But like I want to start thinking outside the box on those. Like
well, I guess that concept too of the simpler stuff at the lower numbers and then more complex. So yeah, I guess so much music is built on relatively few chord progressions or even just like moves within the scale. So
yeah, do you ever use Hook Theory, or have you seen their site?
I think the YouTube.
Yeah.
Is it? They're I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like kind of ear training exercises too.
Yeah.
But they also show you like, here's the chords that are used in these pop songs, and it's kind of eye-opening to see like, okay, just the sheer number of songs that use this exact chord progression, and it has like them ranked by popularity. And all the like top 10 popular ones all sound almost the same, except for like one chord is swapped out.
Right. 1, 5, 6, 4.
Yep.
That's got to be like the most popular one, I would think.
Yep.
But yeah, make it 1, 5, 6, 3.
Yeah.
Oh, there's something. I guess that's a challenge for you to, if you want them to be different, you don't want to repeat yourself. But if you go too far, you have like 4 cards that like sound familiar, and then you got like 50 cards that are like really weird chord progressions, right?
I'm at least, I got the options to do 7th chords and other chords that will just give it a different flavor to the same basic structure. And also some of the chords I'm using, like, it's interesting how, like, I think the first one you picked had, just 1 chord per measure. But I want to get into like 2 chords per measure for a lot of them, or like an irregular pattern. Because I think that is a real key part of making interesting songs, is breaking out of the mold of like 1 chord per measure.
Yeah. But sometimes just deciding that we're going to switch the chord on the 3 in the first, the 3rd bar or whatever, but the other chords are all 4 bars long.
Yeah.
Or the last chord is only 2, and little moves like that to just speed things along, give some push and pull. I watched a great video. I'd never seen this guy before, and I love his channel already because he's dissecting Beach Boys songs, and he's so funny the way how casual he is. I'll find out his name and put him in the show notes. But he he sings amazing. He sounds like Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys, but he's breaking down like some of their songs and some of the modulations they do. And a lot of like the moves they use to get through parts is just speeding up the chord progression. So instead of it being a 4-bar progression, this time it's only 2. It's like kind of compressed, and that gives them the time to throw in like this, dominant 7 chord or something right here, dominant 5 or whatever, and just move through into new territory by taking you through that familiar journey just a little bit faster this time, or a little bit slower.
Interesting.
And yeah, it's really, really good channel. I'm loving it. So
That's cool.
I'll put that in the. Sorry, I don't know his name right now. I just found it last night.
Yeah.
I was like, wow.
Yeah.
It's like unlocking the key of like some magical place. Like,
Ooh.
especially like the Beach Boys, those melodies and harmonies, and it's so complex and interesting, but it still sounds so like innocent. It doesn't sound like crazy jazz or anything that you're like, what's going on here? It's sneaky.
It is very sneaky.
It's sneaky
yeah.
in how clever it is.
Yeah.
I love that. It's so, yeah, there's so much you can do with that. And the way you can interpret the cards too. I'm really glad how you decided to do it, where it's just enough of a suggestion to get you going, but you can totally ignore it or revise it or however you want.
Yeah, and that's my hope also with these like backing tracks that I'm going to record. Like, I don't want them to inform people too much of like, this is what style I should sing in. So I'm trying to figure out like what's a good balance of like, I want it to sound inspiring enough, like nice sounds. So rather than like just straight up like piano MIDI notes or something.
Yeah.
But I don't want it to feel like, oh, now I have to write in this genre because it's, whatever, got a like acoustic guitar and drum sound. It's like, oh, it sounds a little country. I better write a country song.
Right.
But
right. These are country chords now.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're not. They can go a lot of ways.
So I'm thinking I might just have, I'm going to aim for 10 styles, and maybe I'll poll people about like, what styles should I go for? And I might just name them like, okay, this is a dreamy track. Like the one you heard on that video is kind of dreamy. And another one might be like, I don't know. Yeah. Acoustic guitar, some just piano, just flutes or something. Maybe I'll do a medieval instrument ones. Use your ancient pack or something. I was just thinking I should look into that one.
I was just going to say, please feel free if you think anything I have can help.
Yeah.
I'd be honored. I'd love that.
It'd be fun.
If you need weird stuff.
Yeah. I love the ancient pack sounds. There's some that probably wouldn't work because they're probably not pitched to like normal pitches.
Yeah, there's a lot of bizarre stuff going on in there.
Yeah.
When I use those too, I'm kind of like, what's this? Okay. That's the fun of it,
Yeah.
I did a jam one of the days in January just using those sounds, and it was really fun because I'm not thinking about music at all. Like, this thing makes this tone, this gong makes that tone. I don't know what notes they are, and I'm just making stuff.
Where did you get all those sounds? Or were you recording some or finding them?
I got the story is on the webpage, my website. Francois Brenner, guy from I think France. I might be mixing that up. Just reached out, and he found another guy whose name I'm forgetting right now, but is on the site, who had this huge collection, and he sampled them all. Asked me if I wanted to work with them.
Cool.
Put together instruments. So I didn't get to see them and touch them or anything, but I got all the samples and then started building things. Tried to make them interesting and playable, because a lot of it was just long recordings of him fiddling with instruments and trying to figure out how to play them. And I think the guy with the collection helped him a bit with, like, this is what you do with this weird wooden thing that doesn't even look like an instrument. You know, it might be like an animal calling device. So it was a lot of fun to go through that. But then to try to translate it into something useful inside live was another challenge. And part of the fun of that for me is when I open it up, like, I really don't know what I'm going to get either.
Right.
So it's interesting to just get these unusual sounds, and again, like things that they have tones, but I don't really know that they're not like a note.
Right.
They have so many overtones and harmonics that you kind of can't really call it this or that, but there's a few of them that you can play together. Mm-hmm. But it does just sort of take you into another kind of realm. Mm-hmm. You start playing with them. Fun stuff.
Awesome.
So I'm sure, I would think, that there are people that probably want to get involved on the Kickstarter and get a set of these cards. I think that they can go on Kickstarter and find you, but they can also go to charliemccarron.com, right? To that'll bring them there.
Yeah.
Do you have
I'm also
place? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so I am now, since we're pretty close to the stretch goal, I think I can safely say I'm going to make a website, troubadeck.com. So it's like
cool
troubadour, but replace the N with deck. So that can get you the link to the Kickstarter too. And right now, so I was doing this Kickstarter for the Make 100 thing that Kickstarter does, where it's like limited to 100 backers, which I felt like was a good first step for making this. So we were sold out of the actual physical decks on there, but I'll have a survey up on the Kickstarter too that you could put your info in case I do make more decks in the future. But right now, if you want, you can get a digital version that you can have on your phone or print it out for $5 on the Kickstarter. So, yeah, happy
cool.
to have anyone try it out. And there's also like a PDF of the 9 cards I was showing you here that you can just download for free and try out. And yeah, post your videos. We'll see what you can come up with.
I think this is a really cool thing that people would love. You should go into mass production of this deck. It's really cool. I have I'll show you something I have right here because I use it a lot. These musician dice. It's probably
you were telling me about that. I have not seen those though.
It's like a crossover of the worlds too, or like gaming, because these.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know, like a bunch of these. I gotta get my face out of the camera so it'll focus on it, but it's I guess 12-sided die.
I actually have one of those, but only that one.
Yeah, well, it's like a bunch.
It's a bunch of them.
More in the bag. It's
cool.
10, I think, or 12. I don't know. But sometimes when we have our music production club, we'll do like a live meeting, and the thing we've been doing lately, because it's been so fun, is just some sort of challenge, and we spend about 45 minutes making something, and then we get together when we're done, the timer goes off and we come back together and we share what we did. Cool. For about the next hour or so, talk about what we did. And I've been using these all the time just to roll a couple notes, and they might be the chords we use or just a melody line, or it's all kind of optional, like,
sure.
I think a couple of the times we've done it, I just got caught up in something and totally ignored the rules we came up with.
Yeah.
But it's really fun, and you roll these things, and sometimes you get useful notes, sometimes you get like, F sharp, G sharp.
All right, make a song.
Okay, here goes. But even still, like, to get something like that and to figure out a way to do it, it's like a game. It's like a challenge, almost like what you're saying with film score. It's like this problem solving fun thing to do that I think in the end just proves to you over and over again that you just need to start with, give yourself some idea and then go with it. And just sort of trust that your musical taste will come in and that whatever skills you've accumulated over the years will guide you through.
Yeah, for sure.
And you'll learn things as well on the way.
Yeah.
So these cards are great. I mean,
Yeah,
they're much more, they start you in a much more usable place sometimes than the pure randomness.
And just random. Well, it's funny though, you mentioned the like chromatic 4 notes going up, because I think that is literally one of the composition challenges at my college. I don't think my professor used it on my class, but in subsequent years, he said he would give people a challenge of like E, F, F sharp, G. And you have to make a composition using those notes, which just like distills it down to almost more like rhythm. Like if you only had those notes.
Only. So okay.
Yeah, like only those notes.
Yeah.
4 chromatic notes in a row.
Yeah, because if you are allowed to use other notes, you can find clever ways to link them together. But either way, I mean, both things are a challenge.
Yeah,
and I think that's a great way to create. To have something. Because sometimes the open-endedness and the freedom is a curse, where you can do anything. It's too much. You need to be reeled in a little bit. I'm so happy this is doing so well. And
thanks.
The Kickstarter still has 20 days still, so that's fantastic.
Yeah, it was pretty much, we funded in like 3 hours, and then the last few days have been just going up from there. So it's pretty fun. Fun.
It's a great idea, and it's smart, it's simple, it's useful, it's everything you want in this kind of thing. And I'm very glad you're doing it, and I really hope I just wish you nothing but success. And the other kind of game idea sounds really interesting too. I'm looking forward to what that turns into. Yeah,
I'll be looking for playtesters. So if people out there listening have a group that
that was a big topic in the panel.
Getting
playtesters and learning like where the glitches are and all that stuff.
Yep.
It's a lot of work.
The other thing. Yeah. That's the other thing that carries over from any creative field is getting an outside opinion. Because like when you're making the thing, you're experiencing it totally differently than someone else will who's coming in from scratch. So like if you spend an hour working on like 4 measures, your brain hears it so differently. Hence why, like, again, back to that film scoring concept of like starting out simple and getting more complex later. Because like that's what happens when I get too caught up on one section of the film score. I'll keep adding layers and layers, but I've already heard the most basic version, so I'm getting bored with it, so I'm adding layers.
Yeah.
And that's what happens with game designs too sometimes, where you're like, I'm already past this boring beginning part. I'm just going to add all the complex parts. But that's not how anyone else would experience it.
I've always thought about that, whether it's board games or video games. Like, how do you get the difficulty right? And it blows my mind that there, so many like old video games that are still playable, or there aren't more games that are just completely impossible.
Yeah.
There's a couple out there, like you play like old Nintendo games. Like it's just like this game's flawed, but it's amazing to me. Like finding that, it's got to be so much work. It's got to be so tricky.
well, not to go down an entirely different rabbit hole, but I did just watch a really good video from one of my favorite YouTubers about game design, Game Maker's Toolkit, and he's talking about Mario games and how they have to plan for such a wide range of skills from people, because you have the people who played old Mario games who are now really good at doing platformers. They want a challenge, but you have like little kids who've never played Mario that have to somehow beat this game. And so in the video, he goes through this whole idea of how like there's 3 levels of difficulty that are just baked into the game that you don't pick like, oh, I'm going to play hard mode. You can't do that on Mario. You basically have to give people their own ability to choose the path kind of naturally in the game.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm going to go for this harder level or harder part of the level. Like, ooh, I see this like cloud up there that maybe I could get up there and do this thing, versus like the base level of just beating the game.
Right.
Maybe you don't have to do that stuff.
I need to collect all those whatevers and Yoshi coins or something like that.
Yep.
That's funny. There was 1 year at school. I was trying to make some point about, rewards and whatnot. So I brought in the original Nintendo, Super Mario Brothers, and like had the kids come up and play it. And they were so bad at it. Like anyone I ever met that lived through the 80s has some like understanding. They know where like the hidden mushroom, and they know to get the mushroom. Like they know, and like these kids would just like run right into the first bad guy and die every single time. Like, what's wrong with you guys?
Yeah, you just go attack it, punch it.
But you
have to jump on his head, obviously.
Yeah, all those little things. It was just one of those moments where I realized like they just don't know. Like they haven't been exposed to it. And everyone else like that I knew had seen it, they get it, they understand the concepts. But so like
you make me feel better about being old now, because so we do have a special skill set that
we do, but watch them play like any other game. I played my nephew in like NBA 2K, and he just slaughtered me. I had a few like NBA Jam strategies carried over, but otherwise he was just like, in your face, Uncle Brian.
Nice.
No mercy too. He didn't give me any chance whatsoever.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny. But cool. We'll wrap it up. Thanks so much for coming back. It's great talking to you. Great catching up.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome to be back. Yeah. Really appreciate it.
We'll have everything in the show notes for you guys listening. Check out the Troubadeck. It's super cool. I think it's going to bring a lot of joy to a lot of people. I know I'm going to have a lot of fun with it. I already have had a lot of fun with the few cards that you have. So thank you for that. And thank you guys for listening. Thank you for listening to the Music Production Podcast. If you want to help support the show, the best thing you can do is tell a friend, someone you think that would enjoy the show. I'd also love it if you could leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to support my work, you can go to brianfunk.com. I've got tons of Ableton Live packs, tutorials, samples. You can check out my book, The 5-Minute Music Producer, which gives you 365 short music-making activities to help you get started, stay inspired, and finish more music. And there's also the Music Production Club, where you get my latest releases as soon as they're finished. It gives you access to a community of like-minded people who are making music and sharing ideas. You can share your music, find new collaborators, and participate in our live meetings where we set up some kind of musical challenge and then make music together and share our results at the end. That's the Music Production Club. It's a lot of fun, and you can find that and everything that I do at brianfunk.com. Thanks again for listening to the show, and have a great day.